Hi, and welcome to the Utah Tourism Industry Association 2020 Tourism Conference. Thank you for joining us today for this presentation titled Using Data to Support Sound Marketing Decisions. This is presented to you by the Utah Office of Tourism in tandem with its media and ad agency partners Love Communications and Struck. I'm Denise Jordan. I'm the Marketing Analytics and Research Manager for the Utah Office of Tourism. Today you will hear from me with an overview of UOT's business strategy and the decision-making that drives our data collection. In addition, I will introduce a handful of data pieces we evaluate during this decision-making process and a subset of those pieces which are available to our partners. Following my introduction, you will hear from our partners at Love and Struck. Adam Whalen, the Manager of Data Analytics and Research at Love Communications, and strategist Molly O'Neill at Struck will walk you through the process of timely data evaluation and how it guides strategic decision-making at the messaging and targeting levels. This year, more than ever, has highlighted the need for agility and an ability to pivot to changing market conditions and consumer confidence fluctuations. Throughout this presentation, Adam and Molly will illustrate the use of data and the downstream decision-making through the lens of the COVID pandemic. This discussion will offer insights on how data use can inform and guide your own marketing decisions. To get us going, I would like to briefly walk you through the overarching UOT strategy guided by UOT's Red Emerald initiative, and discuss how data supports our daily actions and interactions with DMO, industry, and business partners throughout the state. I'm going to start by talking through our vision statement. The UOT vision is a state united in welcoming the world to experience soul-awakening adventure. Our mission is to elevate life in Utah through responsible tourism stewardship. And the position statements supporting this mission are threefold. One is marketing. We curate messaging that inspires visitation, supports local businesses, and builds the Utah economy. Secondly is stewardship. We distribute visitation statewide and support the responsible discovery of Utah. Thirdly, development. We partner with local communities to enhance and develop their visitor economies to benefit residents and visitors alike. Our presentation today focuses on the marketing portion of this position statement, and specifically our presentation today discusses data as a means to inform the decisions we make around this marketing function. In order to inspire visitation, support local businesses, and ultimately support the Utah economy, what types of questions do we try to answer to guide our strategy? Reviewing the very simple who, what, when, where, why, and how types of questions can lead to discovery. Who visits Utah? What do they do when they come here? When do people visit Utah? Where do they go when they come here? Where are they coming from? Why are they visiting Utah? Why might they choose a different destination? How? How are visitors traveling? How are they finding information? So, how do we answer these questions? Well, with data. The data we collect helps inform our decision-making at all stages. Data helps with our goal setting. Data helps us follow performance and know how we are doing or how we did. Data can help us pivot in the short term, and data helps inform long-term strategies. Together with its agency partners, UOT is collecting and monitoring a lot of data. All of these data pieces help paint a picture of the travel and tourism landscape across the state of Utah, from north to south, from urban to rural, and throughout all seasons of the year. How does this data help us? Well, it might help us review high-impact areas for dispersion consideration. It could create itineraries benefiting overall customer service. It could help us increase visitor spend by lengthening visits by offering other activities visitors can participate in. It also helps us identify important content topics that we might support on our website or offer for native advertising placement. And finally, it provides cues to UOT and its partners on how to advocate best for travel and tourism at the state or federal legislative level. With all of this comes an increased understanding, and this statewide understanding leads to better marketing and ultimately more valuable customer experiences. Many of the same tools UOT uses to paint this landscape and create this understanding are also used by our partners. Some are free, some are subscription, and some are matched by UOT dollars. You can find this information on our industry research page in the research area. Examples of what is available there include public dashboards where you can find single segment monthly star lodging information, national and state park visitation information, tourism tax information by county, and international statewide visitation and spending data. In addition to the public dashboard, you can also find visitor profile information, which answers a lot of those who, what, when, where, why, how types of questions. We also share data from the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute on statewide travel and tourism economic impact data. This includes individual county information and an interactive dashboard where you can find specific pieces tailored to your needs. Finally, I want to conclude with information mentioned in the introduction. Reviewing current data on an ongoing basis is a consistent theme for UOT, Love, and Struck. It helps us optimize media placement and messaging. The coronavirus pandemic has emphasized the importance of data. Our ability to evaluate this data and a willingness to be nimble and adjust to the changing market conditions and consumer confidence fluctuations has been and is key. Throughout the remainder of this presentation, we will illustrate the use of data and the downstream decision-making through the lens of the coronavirus pandemic. This discussion will offer additional insights on how data use can inform and guide your own marketing decisions. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, I'm Molly from Struck. As in many industries, COVID-19 rattled the travel vertical, leaving everyone clamoring for the answer to a simple question: what do we do? The past few months have been a perfect case study in the importance of using data to guide marketing decisions. Our COVID strategy was a three-phased approach, where we developed and launched new creative based on the messages our travelers in waiting needed to hear during each phase. And we looked at data to tell us when to move from one to the other, what to say, and where to say it. Now you'll hear more on that from Adam.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Molly. And as she mentioned, we're going through these sort of three phases, right? Immediate, Renaissance, and we're trying to talk through how do we guide through these phases. And the answer is it's all about data, data, and more data. This has been a linchpin of what we do and what our teams do with the Utah Office of Tourism for a long time. But COVID-19 really took this practice and put it dead center, right? So we had to make sure that every decision we were making was data-driven and that every insight we were garnering was informed from trusted sources. But the thing is data can be extremely noisy, right? I mean, we have so many data sources, and at the outset of this outbreak, there was so many balls to juggle in the air, and how do we deal with this? And so what we ultimately did is we settled upon 4 sort of relaunch KPIs. And these were based upon our industry expertise, some collaboration between our internal teams. And as you'll see on the slide, it really is sort of a variety of things we're trying to monitor. The first is when state-by-state cases are peaking. The reason this was a valuable relaunch KPI in the era of COVID-19 is because we could understand when to advertise in specific states. Are they on the downturn with cases? But then there's, some more lower level things. Like the third KPI there is a little more abstract, but it's consumer optimism. So COVID cases aren't the only piece of the equation. It's also something like consumer optimism. So we have these relaunch KPIs, and we have this just absurd swath of data, as you're seeing here on this next slide, right? We have website data. We're looking at website sessions. Are people engaging with folks on the website? We're looking at search trends. What types of things are people searching? Are they searching for things about vacations? Are they searching for Utah specifically? We have a ton of research, right? I mean, we're looking at third-party research with partners like Adara, Destination Analysts, Skift, and then even first-party research. We went out and put out Google surveys, and we took our own action to answer questions that were unique to our problems. And where the magic comes, and again, this is a thought process that permeates beyond COVID-19, is taking that strategic thinking of those relaunch KPIs and assigning them to specific data sources, which is what we're seeing here, right? And so let's go back to that first KPI, right? We're monitoring state by state their case counts. And so as you can see, we're actually attaching data sources and KPI and specific pieces of evidence to this KPI. So we're looking at CDC data. We're looking at state-by-state breakdowns of COVID cases, of 14-day changes. There on KPI number 4, we're looking at page views for TripAdvisor, Expedia. This is lower level stuff, right? We're talking about sort of direct travel intent. And how are we monitoring that? Well, we're doing it by looking at website sessions. We're receiving weekly data from TripAdvisor about page view growth, showing that people are searching out Utah and larger vacations. We're looking at hotel searches on Expedia. But that's really the magic in this, is you're able to actually go through by doing this full process and working between the teams, and you're able to say, we know we need to accomplish these things. There's benchmarks we need to reach. Now, what data sources can show us those? Now, you may be asking, the very important question is, how do you track all of these things? It's quite difficult to do. And the answer we have is we launched a real-time dashboard that updated every single day that we were running through with stakeholders on a very frequent basis. And so as you'll see, when we're running through this video, we have a very much live, interactive environment. And one of the metrics we look at is called a post impression, which is when someone sort of sees our ad and then visits the Visit Utah website or a partner site. And this is valuable because it's a much greater level of intent to travel. They're showing they've been impacted by these ads. And as we watch here, when you hover over these lines, we can actually monitor post impression rate over time. And we can start to look at how things are doing and even filter in different ways. Of course, that's just one piece of the equation, and this is where it gets so fun, because then we can dive into Google Analytics data. And as destinations, this is something any of you guys can access, right, free of charge. You just append the code to your website, and you can start getting these same metrics that we're showing you here, looking at sessions over time, average session duration. And what gets really fun is you can use this dashboard, because it's live, to monitor the trends. And you see that huge dip there in April was the height of COVID-19. And we have recovered quite nicely over the last few months. But again, we'd stress this is a tool that you yourself can use. But some people, I love my line graphs, and I know Denise does too, but sometimes these maps are just as convincing, right? And so what we're seeing here is sort of how are we doing by state across the nation with sessions over time. So another way to visualize the data that goes back to our relaunch KPIs. And then of course, as we move on, one of our relaunch KPIs was around search terms. And so you can see here, we're looking at how often are people searching for the terms vacation over time. And you can hover over, and the blue line there is 2020, and the orange line is 2019. And there's that dip right at the start of COVID-19, when people were basically saying, hey, I'm not ready for a vacation, and then it recovered. But then we can also look at things like hotel. And this can extend to how we're recovering on the urban side of things. And it links into potentially a paid search strategy as well. But of course, what we end up with here too is our third-party research. What you're seeing here are some screen grabs of destination analysts who release survey data every single week, and we're able to comb through that and consolidate the most pertinent takeaways in one location. Now, you can actually receive this report free of charge if you're a destination. A lot of these research materials are not just paid subscriptions. These are things you can access. What you're seeing here is a really good approach by us on our collaborative teams of throwing them into a dashboard, because it's a much more organic and easy way for folks to look at the data. And so now here what we'll do is launch into another dashboard that we've created. And this one really focuses on monitoring those 4 KPIs in a more explicit fashion. So whereas the last dashboard we looked at was trend focused, this one we're really looking at something that's looking at the 4 KPIs and how they're performing in each state. And what you can see here is we've created sort of a user interface that allows you to look at the data in the aggregate, which we'll hop into first, or go state by state. So first, we'll hop into COVID-19 case data. So one of our KPIs is concerned with, sort of a flattening or a decrease of cases, and that 14-day change in particular is noticeable. And so what you're seeing here on our dashboard is that we're able to easily filter for all of our drive market states, or just any state in particular, and look at how they're doing over those key time periods. Again, reflecting back to the KPI. This is data anyone can access. Again, the magic here is putting it into a dashboard or visualizing it in a way that helps you track those KPIs. But as you're seeing here, we can also click into any of these states and look at how they're performing. So when we hop into Utah, you can see we have all of this sort of aggregate data pushed into one environment. We're looking at COVID-19 cases for those KPIs that relate back to that metric, but we also have website sessions, all in one view for the state of Utah. You can filter the date, you can hotkey back to the last 14 days, and as you can see, our reopening date was back on May 1st as a key trend to watch for. So this, in accompaniment with the market trend analysis dashboard we first went through, is essentially a very nice live environment where you can track these things and you can understand how you're doing. Once again, noting that this is something that even if it's not in a dashboard format, anyone can really set up. A lot of these data sources are free. Google Analytics is, Google Trends is. A lot of the research partners are simple email or newsletter signups. But as we moved along and it came to around May or June, we realized we kind of needed to adapt to our KPIs, right? What we saw in these 4 relaunch KPIs is that they weren't exactly tracking user behavior all that accurately. People were still traveling. We knew national parks were getting more crowded. And so this is the key thing, is to know when to adapt. So what we did is we went back using our expertise, using our industry and our vertical knowledge, and we understood how do we change these KPIs. And it's subtle. But what we ended up with was our relaunch KPIs version 2.0, as we're seeing on this slide. As you can see on the first bullet point, we really narrowed in past the idea of just cases going down, instead opting to look at some specific sort of medical data points and things more in the weeds, such as what's the bed capacity looking like? What's the risk level as measured by rate of transmission? And this is still, again, coming from the CDC. We're looking at something like community readiness to accept overnight visitors, because this somewhat ties in to KPI 3 there in blue, which is around consumer optimism, but it's very specific to the destination, because we know people are going to be traveling, but we want to make sure that the destinations and the people that live there are ready to accept them. But then some maintain the same, such as KPI 4 there in black. We're still monitoring page views on TripAdvisor, Expedia, and Visit Utah as what is a proxy for consumer intent to travel because they're going on these websites. So as you can see, Relaunch KPIs 2.0 had a lot of things that were similar, and the underlying data sources that we're using don't change all that much. We're still using Destination Analyst as a third-party research partner. We're still looking at CDC data. But we've tweaked sort of the benchmarks or the key points we're looking for in order to reach those points. And this leads to one of the last dashboards we've created, which is really focused in on some of these core KPIs that are actually established by larger entities of when are we going to be over COVID-19. And so what you're seeing here is a hospitalization data dashboard where we're really focusing in on those medical statistics to understand how we're performing. Again, with a nice date filter, so you can go to any point you want, and then you can also hover over each state to see how they're doing against a litany of data points. You can see how the beds occupied percentage is doing to know, are the hospitals being overwhelmed? What is the percent test positive rate, which is more or less widely agreed to be the best way to measure spread. But everyone knows that data overload is very much a thing, even though we love it a ton here. And so we also have everything color coordinated with the help of our source COVID exit strategy for a quick glance as to how the state is performing. But like our other dashboards, what's really cool is that you can drill down into the data. And I would again stress that not only is this publicly available, but you don't have to go this deep to do this type of monitoring. What you're seeing here is the 14-day percent change in COVID cases, and we can hop between states, right? We can say, how's Utah doing? How's Washington doing? Can I look at one specific state over which date ranges? And again, this is just a very nice intuitive way to measure the data. But when you go back to the core fundamental principle of why it matters, is because we're trying to understand what messages to go into market with. And we know that we have these KPIs supported by data points that allow us to make those decisions based on our expertise. And what's really critical is, again, as shown by this new dashboard, is constantly reevaluating, and looking back at what you're doing. So we'll step back for a second and we'll stop the chart and data point overload as much as some of us enjoy it. And we'll talk specifically about what the future days hold. COVID-19 really was more or less a microcosm of how we approach and tackle problems with our respective teams, Love, Struck, and Utah Office of Tourism, right? And as COVID-19 continues to evolve, these data principles and practices remain more important than ever, right? Understand what you need to do, set some KPIs, and figure out what data points support those, whether it be free or paid. A few things we're doing in the future include micro-audience segmentation. So we know that more than ever in the wake of COVID-19, we'll really need to focus in on specific audiences and reach them with convincing messages to get them to come to Utah or any other destination really in practice if you want to look at this beyond our entities. And this is a process by which we're collecting survey data and then we'll use algorithmic techniques to cluster the audiences into unique behavioral buckets. So we know we have skiers, we know we have national park visitors, but this will allow us to really narrow in on, say, who is the mountain biking audience and what is it specifically that they want. Is a nightlife audience pertinent and is it relevant right now? Or is there another audience we don't even know about? And a lot of this is done, again, through that survey data and using some really awesome mathematics to be able to, in a non-biased way, figure out who these audiences are. We're also going one step further in terms of procuring insights for winter travel, which is coming up very quick. So we've actually taken RRC data and we started to compare that against destination analysts to understand how the skiing audience is differing in their travel planning for the winter compared to a more general traveling audience. So these are a few ways that we're trying to inform our future decisions. Again, still linchpinning on these basic strategic concepts and best practices as it pertains to making data-driven decisions. And of course, the way to kind of encapsulate this before I hand this off to Molly to talk about what's the outcome of all this, right? Because at the end of the day, we can all talk about data strategy, but what does it look like? Is that this will always be an iterative loop, right? We're always going to be designating KPIs based upon our strategic goals, finding the data that best measures or supports those sort of KPIs, and then we're constantly going to be reevaluating and going through the full funnel. And so the whole idea here is that data-driven decision marketing is a beautiful blend between visualizing that data, whether it be in a dashboard, gathering the data, and then actually putting it into practice. And for that, I'll hand it over to Molly from Struck to talk through what that actually looks like.
So, how does data affect creative? Where does it fit into the creative process? A lot of people assume that we do research, collect data, analyze it only at the beginning before we write the creative brief. And while that may be where the bulk of it occurs, we really look to data at every stage. So at the beginning, we're solidifying our campaign strategy, gathering qualitative and quantitative data from interviews and focus groups, surveys, using tools like MRI and GWI to help us understand who we're talking to and what they're looking for. Once we move into brainstorming, data helps us evaluate campaign ideas in real time. Based on what we know, will this idea resonate or not? As we're designing, we use data we've gathered from past campaign performance and general knowledge about what kinds of colors, images, layouts lead to the best results. We can then test that creative before our campaign launches. And after launch, we monitor performance and make changes based on what we're learning. Finally, at the conclusion of every campaign, we take a good hard look at what happened to make sure we learn from our successes and failures. Data is something we should be continually gathering, monitoring, and using to optimize our performance. In the next few minutes, I'll go over 4 different ways you can use data to improve your creative and, as a result, your campaigns. Number 1, based on the audience data you have, develop 3 to 4 personas. Even if you've never done any formal, fancy audience segmentation, you likely know more than you think about your audiences. What kinds of people are visiting your destination or utilizing your service? What are their interests, motivators, values, or concerns? A lot of marketing organizations unnecessarily complicate personas, but the simpler and broader they are actually, like this one you see for UOT, the more effective they'll be in application for your marketing. Second, based on those personas, develop targeted creative for each audience with messaging that speaks to those audiences' specific needs. It's important here that we don't develop targeted creative for targeting's sake. only when those various audiences are different enough to warrant different messages. And of course, even when we have different messages, it's critical to ensure consistency with the brand and with the overall campaign strategy. Third, being intentional about what we're communicating at each stage of the customer journey. The UOT has done a ton of one-on-one interviews to help understand how a traveler moves through the marketing funnel and what info they need at each step. For example, at the awareness stage, we're showing them ads with breathtaking Utah imagery to inspire them. During consideration, we may address some concerns about crowds or safety in a retargeted ad or a native article. If they're intending to visit, we may serve them an itinerary, encouraging them to visit specific places or add a guided experience to advance our Red Emerald initiative. And once they've booked, we can retarget them with responsible travel advertising. We often have a lot of messages we want to communicate, but not enough time or space to communicate them. This can be the solution to that problem. Lastly, one of the easiest ways to collect data and use it to optimize your marketing is learning from what you're already doing. Treat your campaign as an experiment. What's performing well? What's not? Why? Form a hypothesis and test it by making changes to lower performing creative and then relaunching it to see what happens. One example of this, last year we noticed our digital ads for our family audience weren't performing as well as the others. We wondered if that had anything to do with the grandmother featured in the ad. So we substituted a new family image with a parent instead. And whether it's because people are ageist or because people can't relate to traveling to Utah with grandparents, performance increased. Another example is our approach to this past year's ski campaign. We went even further here and treated it like an actual experiment, launching 3 different rounds of digital creative. First, testing messaging. You'll see on the slide 2 different messages communicating access and snow. Everything else kept the same. In the second round, we tested different images with the winning message from round 1. And finally, we tested slight design variations in fonts, colors, and layout. We ended up with the best possible ads in market, and we learned a lot for subsequent campaigns. The point of all this is even if you don't have a super sophisticated approach to data, there's still so much you can do to start incorporating it into your marketing process and hopefully improve things as a result.
Once again, thank you for joining the Utah Office of Tourism, Love Communications, and Struck for this presentation. We've enjoyed walking you through our process and hope you find this information valuable as you use data to inform your own marketing strategies.